Welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy Podcast. I'm Ani Anderson.
And I'm Brian Trzaskos. Join us as we explore the science
and art of trauma-sensitive somatic practices and tools.
Strengthen your practice as a coach, therapist, or holistic professional.
Master the art of motivating even the most challenging clients when you understand how to tap into and unlock your client's complete holistic intelligence.
If you want to learn the most cutting-edge, research-supported skills for personal and professional mastery, you've come to the right place. Let's get this conversation started.
Hi, and welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy Podcast. Welcome to episode 73. Hi, Brian.
Hello, Ani.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Today, we're talking about somatic practices for grief and loss. And I was really curious how you came up with that topic.
Well, there's so much press on anxiety.
Anxiety does get a lot of press. The marketers for anxiety.
Anxiety
really
gets a lot of press, doesn't it? There's articles and we've done a few podcasts at least on anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't done one on the other side. What a lot of people think of the other side of the spectrum, grief and loss. However, they often can be paired together. Mm-hmm. Also, people can experience grief, depression, loss, and anxiety also. Yeah. But I thought we'd just take a moment to just kind of focus in a little bit more specifically on experiences of grief and loss and how somatic exercises or somatic practices can be used for people who are experiencing grief and loss.
Yeah, boy, I'm really glad that you picked this topic. And I think it's interesting that a lot of times when we're experiencing grief and loss, it can feel very lonely and alone. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. The press out there is more screaming at us about anxiety. Yeah. And, we need resources for grief and loss.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think about grief and loss and depression kind of on like a spectrum, if you will. And the spectrum kind of looks like this, like sadness, grief, depression. Mm-hmm. And if we look at it from, a Chinese medicine perspective too, it's, sadness is associated with the metal element, which is often associated with the season of the fall of autumn, where the leaves are falling off the trees. So there's this sense of, loss that can happen. I know a lot of people experience a sense of, sadness or kind of like a deep or interesting nostalgia that can happen in the fall for a lot of times for people.
A lot of people pass away too. Yeah. There's just this like natural passing away that happens in the autumn.
That time of year, right?
People lose people that time of year.
Because we're natural beings. And so of course humans are also in the natural cycle of life and things. So, so loss is really correlated with a sense of sadness, like an emotional response of sadness. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so when sadness persists, again, from a kind of a Chinese medicine perspective, it becomes grief. It's, sadness can be thought of as a more transient experience, like, at the moment I'm experiencing sadness. And grief might be more thought of as a more entrenched experience of sadness. So it's happening for longer periods of time, longer durations.
It also feels deeper. Mm. I'm just thinking about clients we've had who have worked through some kinds of awarenesses and breakthroughs, and they get to what's going on underneath. Mm-hmm. And grief is actually a common thing that is hiding, waiting for us to acknowledge it under another layer.
Under another layer, yeah.
Yeah, and the client will often say how it feels so deep. That's actually the thing I hear most often about grief. It's like I'm feeling, and they'll label it grief, and they'll say it just feels so vast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and oftentimes grief can really become or kind of run into depression.
Sure.
So that sadness can become grief, and grief can become depression. And there's some interesting research coming out now showing that that depression, we look at MRI research, like fMRI stuff, like look at parts of the brain that have to do with sensory awareness in the body, like specifically parts of the brain, like the insula, which is a part of the brain that picks up sensory information from the body and then kind of starts to make some sense of it and then routes it to other parts of the brain for processing, that part of the brain actually is not working. It's not activated
Hmm.
for people who experience depression. And so when researchers started looking at that and they started doing some studies and some research to how does that actually show up with people, one of the conclusions that they really came to, and I wasn't surprised when I heard this, it made total sense to me, but it was also like an awareness, is that depression is really a protective response. It's a protective
Oh,
response to not feeling the pain of loss
yeah, that makes a lot of
or
sense.
not feeling that deep grief. So like what you
Yeah.
said, there's grief
Because,
as the hiding under there.
yeah.
And so when we experience depression, what's actually happening in the brain is the parts of the brain that sense the body aren't working.
Yeah.
So the brain
Wow.
actually cannot even feel the body.
That makes a lot of
And
sense to
that's
me.
associated with depression.
Yeah.
So when someone is clinically depressed and they have an fMRI, I mean, it's not just happening in they're not making it up.
Yeah.
Their neurological workings of their brain are not working in such a way where they can even sense into their body. And the psychological system is using depression as a protective
Protective
response
mechanism.
to not feel the pain,
Yeah.
not feel the pain of loss.
I can see that because when my clients will uncover what they determine is grief, there is the next thing that happens is this fear that it's never going to go away. Like
Yeah.
it does, but that they're at that moment that they're like, oh my God, it's grief. And the next thing is like, it's so vast. It's never going to go away. I can see that the body would help protect us against that because I think that's kind of terrifying.
Yeah, it can feel existential, really,
Yes.
right? Like
Yes.
that loss can feel, especially if the loss is associated with a close family member, someone you really cared about, someone you were energetically kind of
Connected with.
connected with. Like that kind of loss can really feel like a part of ourselves
Yeah.
is also really lost.
Yeah.
And so the psychophysiological mechanism is to, again, shut down the parts of the brain that would experience that as a protective response. Now, of course, the other side of that is sure, you can't feel the pain of the loss and grief, but you also can't feel joy. You can't feel anything else
I
either.
was just going to say that. So we have a really good friend and a client who we helped to develop a nonprofit around helping people with grief and loss.
Hmm.
And one of her, I guess, favorite things I could say, one of her, it's such an honor to be able to do with people is to tap into that, what you just said, that if you don't feel the grief, you can't feel the joy. And I know that's not really what we're talking about here today. But I think it's so worthy of mentioning because grief can have this endless, like you said, existential quality to it. And it also, on the other side, can have this opening up to more of the world and life and
Hmm.
joy than you ever thought possible.
Yeah, it's not only you can't feel anything else,
Yeah.
right? So it's not even like joy, but you can't even feel um, satisfaction
Yeah.
or motivation or a craving or a whatever. Like you literally can't feel anything at all. And oftentimes depression, when people are experiencing depression, they have, interestingly enough, higher actually pain markers.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
so this is kind of interesting, right? Because it's a protective response to not experience the pain of the loss,
Yeah.
but people tend to also have higher ratings of physical pain,
Hmm.
like back pain,
Yeah.
neck pain,
Well, that
those
makes
kinds of
so
things,
much
right? So
sense.
there's proprioceptive kind of
Yeah.
pain that's going on, and some of that too is because depression is actually linked with a hyperactivation of the sympathetic nervous system, which
Yeah.
is also kind of being muted by that pain response. I actually just heard something interesting today. I was listening to some research that love actually, the sensations and the feelings and the experience of love actually decreases pain perception.
Hmm.
So for someone who's experiencing pain, if they
Hmm.
think about someone that they deeply and really love, it actually lowers their perception of pain, right? Because there's neurohormone profiles associated with experience of love that are going to affect that.
And for some people, with that cue, they'll think of somebody they lost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which will create more of that numbing.
Yeah.
So really, if we're experiencing depression, we won't be experiencing love because we can't experience anything at all.
Yeah.
We're really shutting down the whole
The whole
sensory
system.
system.
Hmm.
So
That makes sense why somatic practices would be so
Yeah.
powerful then, because it starts to wake us up and in a gentle way.
Yeah. Yeah. Because really, when you're experiencing depression, you're really in a tough spot in that the same pathway to experiencing joy and happiness and lightness will also open up experiencing the pain of grief and loss.
100%. And that joy, like we talked about in other episodes, is so far away on the spectrum of consciousness. We're going to feel everything, not just hop straight to the joy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's really important when we talk about somatic exercises or somatic practices for grief, loss, depression. It's really important to think about kind of slowly getting the system working.
You know how I like to think about this? It's like an ice cube.
Hmm.
Like you warm it up
Yeah.
rather than smashing the ice, you warm up the ice and just kind of starts to flow.
Yeah. So trying to, for someone who's experiencing depression and a lot of a shutdown of their sensory nervous system, to try to get them activated too quickly can be re-traumatizing for people because it opens up the sensory
Yeah.
system
Oh, that
too
doesn't feel
fast.
safe. Yeah.
And then they deeply experience that grief, and
Right.
then that creates more trauma. So it's really about, I love what you're saying about kind of warming up the ice cube. We really have to take it kind of slow. So what we love to talk about somatic exercises that they always meet people where they are.
Hmm.
And so what are some really simple ones? Some really ones that I really like are some really easy and gentle self-massage practices.
Oh, I love that.
And
Yeah.
in a way, actually, as easy and gentle as just placing a hand
Hmm.
on, not even doing like acupressure
Yeah.
or deep rubbing
Trying to
or
do
anything
something
like, right? We're not
specific.
doing that. All you're doing is just taking your
Self
hands
touch.
and self-touch. You're just putting your
Yeah.
hands on your body and noticing what they kind of feel like. Feel the weight of the hands,
Yeah.
feel the gentle pressure. Put them on, you try them on your
Yeah. Over
neck,
your eyes. My
your
favorite one
eyes,
is my thighs.
thighs, over your heart, over your
Hmm.
belly, wherever.
Yeah. Doesn't
It
matter.
doesn't really matter. It's like wherever would feel supportive and kind of feels like it would start to melt the ice cube a little bit. It's
Yeah.
just practicing some of that really nice, gentle self-touch.
Yeah.
And then when it feels able, you can start to add just a little, maybe a little bit of rubbing,
Movement.
some gentle rubbing or some gentle
Hmm.
pressure and release, so that you go from a gentle holding into some slightly more uh, information, let's say, for the sensory system. And it might not feel like much because if the part of the brain is shut down that would receive that
Sure.
information, it might not feel like much is happening, but something's happening.
I see out there people talking about how important self-love is when you're experiencing grief and loss. And I think this is the embodied practical what that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. So that self-touch, self-massage, gentle, think about gentle meeting yourself where you are and then slowly starting to warm up the system. I like to think about it like maybe a car that's been out in the cold for a really long time and we're trying to get it started in the spring. We got to be gentle with it. Got to put a little plug the heating block in, kind of push it into a warm garage before we start it up and start running it. We want to just be gentle like that. The mindful movement practices are another favorite one of mine. Oftentimes when people are depressed, they don't feel like doing things, and that's a part of being depressed. And movement seems very laborious. And oftentimes people are like, "Oh, you got to get out and exercise. You're depressed.
Exercise,
Get
right?
out, go outside, do
Go
things."
exercise. And that's going from 0 to 100.
Right. That's like just like trying to turn over that car after it's
Yeah.
been frozen for the winter and get it moving.
And then it increases the cycles of shame that can be going on because the efficacy of what you're trying to accomplish, if you're just going to go out and exercise, then it becomes potentially self-sabotaging. We term within,
Yeah.
right? I can't do it. There's something wrong with me. This confirms there's something wrong with me and all of that
Right.
stuff.
Yeah. There's actually a really wonderful term called sense foraging, where every day you mindfully like intend and purposefully experience sensations that you wouldn't ordinarily experience on a daily basis.
That's such a great word. I've never heard
Yeah.
that before.
So
It's like mushroom
yeah,
foraging.
so like with self-touch, you can put your hands on a part of the,
That's so
part of the
cool.
body you would normally put it in and do a little movement. You can take a wet washcloth and put it on there. So it's
We
just
should
like,
do a retreat where we just like
yeah, some sense
sensory
foraging.
forage for like a week.
Yeah, and like mindful movement, if you get up and you just start walking around, you can say, wow, okay, so instead of thinking about what I ordinarily think about, like how does it actually feel to have my feet on the cold tiles sort
Yeah,
of thing,
right.
right? If I stand near a window and feel a breeze, what does it feel like to have that breeze? If I open my eyes, like in my kitchen that I look at every day, like what colors can I see in my kitchen that I've
Hmm.
never even noticed before or here? If I sit where I ordinarily sit during the day and I open my ears, what sounds can I hear that I don't ordinarily hear?
Hmm.
So you're purposely going out of your way to start picking up different sensory experiences.
Hmm.
And what that does is it starts to break through what we call the default mode network. The default mode network is the part of the brain that's always kind of running, and it's the part of the brain that would keep us in that depressive
It's
kind
like
of
the
protective state.
autopilot
Yeah,
kind
it's
of
the
thing.
autopilot. So we need to kind of begin to disrupt that autopilot, and the way you do that is with novel sensory stimuli. So you could
That's
you
so
could
cool.
do that by self-massage. You could
Yeah.
do that with mindful moving, coordinated breathing,
Hmm.
like our core centering practices. You can do that with mindful, again, breathing practices where you can start to feel the breath move in and out. You could blow on a pinwheel. You could cool a cup of tea and kind of feel the breath go out as you watch the ripples on the tea. You could blow dandelions. Like there's so many different things that you could do to stimulate novel sensory information.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. I love that how easy that is. It's so simple and
Yeah.
available to anybody.
Yeah. Oh, so available. And like little movements, like even like just little side bending movements. So if we're talking about mindful movements, just you can do these sitting down. Don't even have to get up. If you don't want to.
That's another thing when with depression, you don't feel like moving. You can do these really
Yeah,
subtle
right.
things and you don't have to move a lot, but it just starts to prime the pump.
Right. So some of my
I
favorite
like what you're
mindful
doing right now,
movements
by
are
the
just
way.
these. Yeah.
I'm not ignoring you. I'm interrupting you for a second. One of the reasons I like this, specifically for like grief and loss, is because it starts to open up the lungs.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, right? Starts to open up the lungs. And you can also do things where you kind of open
Yeah.
and close the front of your body. So it's just a simple, like up a little taller and extend the spine to open the front of the body a little
Yep.
bit and
Little work on the
close the
heart
body.
space.
And, I'm demonstrating this here, and this might feel like big movement for some people.
Yeah.
I'm making the movements a little bit bigger because it translates better on camera. If I was just doing little movements, it might not
You
look
wouldn't
like
see.
I'm doing much. So for you, if it feels like, oh God, these little movements are plenty, then these little
That's
movements is
perfect.
perfect. And ask yourself, is this creating a new sensory experience for me? Because again, we're just sense foraging with it.
Yeah.
And then you can combine your breathing with it, like inhale, open, exhale, kind of close, inhale, lean one way, exhale, lean the other way, sort of thing, back and forth.
Mhm.
Like these little small movements are great ways to begin to initiate that activity through the insula.
Hmm.
Yeah.
If you're listening and you're thinking you'd like to see what Brian's talking about, come on over to our YouTube
YouTube channel.
channel.
Yeah.
It's Somatic Coaching Academy. You can watch the video.
Yep. Yeah. And a nice breath practice too, unless you had a question or a thought about the movement practices.
No, I have another thought when you're done.
Oh, I was just going to just share one of my favorite breath practices for working with people who are experiencing is ocean breathing.
Hmm.
And so the reason I like ocean, so it's really when you're breathing, you're kind of like, I'm kind of trying to get to the close to the microphone and
Yeah.
do an ocean breath. But
Like an ocean.
so where you kind of breathe through the back of your throat,
Yeah.
so it sounds like the ocean. The reason I like that is because again, now you're creating a new auditory sense that you can hear, but you're also creating a new physical sensation in the back of the throat too.
Yeah.
So it's a way to focus mindfully on breathing, but then you're also lighting up some other sensors as well.
Yeah.
And it's really good to practice that breathing through the nasal passages because there's linkages into the hypothalamus parts of the brain we've talked about in other podcasts as well.
Yeah. And then you might think about yourself at the beach, which
Yeah.
was a really pleasant experience for
Mhm.
a lot of people, or calming,
Yeah.
healing experience for a lot of people.
Yeah. What did you have now? You had a question or
No,
thought?
I was just wondering about different practitioners that this doing somatic practices or knowing somatic practices might be useful for. So I'm imagining that there's practitioners who could have somatic practices in their toolbox that'd be really powerful
Hmm.
for people with grief and loss. I mean, some of the ones that come to mind for me, which are probably pretty obvious, are like social workers, psychologists, and those kinds of things, caseworkers,
Hmm.
but also I'm thinking teachers.
Yeah.
So we we don't talk a ton about what practices are appropriate for children on the podcast. We talk to our students about those kinds of things, but a lot of kids deal with grief and loss, and
Yeah.
having a teacher who can
Hmm.
sit by them. I'm getting emotional just talking about it, right?
Yeah.
Like can do ocean breath with them or something like that. Know some somatic practices in their back pocket. Like
Yeah.
the value of that's huge. I'm also thinking about volunteers.
Yeah.
I volunteered for hospice for a long time, and you do a lot of work with hospice as well. And was just thinking about how beneficial it would be, regardless of the physical or cognitive state of the people who I was helping in the hospice programs, to be able to sit and do somatic practices. And there's documented research about
Yeah.
how powerful that can be for people, to bring peace in those times.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Certainly nurses also come to mind.
yeah.
Nurses, these practices can be so powerful for RNs, LPNs, any type of nursing professionals that are working with patients in hospitals and clients in hospitals that are getting ready for tests
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
surgeries and those types of things that might be experiencing anxiety or stress or again loss, bereavement, like those types of things. Like I love that you're mentioning hospice, right? Because
Yeah.
that's a full-on experience of loss and grief for not only obviously for the families that are
Yes.
losing their loved ones.
Yes, for sure. When you said nurses, I'm thinking about massage therapists and other practitioners who people will go see as quote unquote self care, acupuncturists and things like that. I remember for myself when I was doing more hands on work, if I'd have a client who came in who was experiencing some kind of grief and loss, I wanted to like leave them with a gift. Not like the session isn't kind of like a gift, but I wanted to kind of like impart something for them, kind of like a gift, and to be able to show them something that they could do, even a simple hands-on practice for themselves would just feel to me like such a valuable offering to that person, that they can take home
Yeah,
with them.
yeah,
So
for sure, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
So if this episode has felt kind of valuable to you and you're working with people who are experiencing sadness, grief, depression, loss, remember that somatic practices, the way that we use them is meeting people where they are, starting off slow, warming up the physiology as if we're an ice cube. We're just slowly trying to melt it, and then always kind of meeting and progressing people as they can go. The idea is sense foraging, picking up new sense information on a daily basis, which starts to kind of heal and rebuild the insular pathways. Always want to have support as people are warming up their system. They want to make sure they have some type of psychotherapeutic emotional support
Yeah.
system has got to be in place for people and to help support people as they move through a process that can ultimately bring them back to a sense of happiness and joy and engagement and life and vitality and all those things that are possible for everyone on the planet, right? They're possible for everybody, even though it might feel that there's deep, dark times. Like these practices are time tested. They work. They work if we just practice them and do them.
And we invite you, come learn how to do
Yeah.
this so that you can give this gift to others, because it really does truly feel
Mhm.
like a gift that we give to others and to ourselves. When you come and get certified in Somatic Practice Essentials, that's our level 1 program, what you'll find is not only do you leave with a toolbox of wonderful things that you can do with individuals and in classes and workshops and things like that, but also the experience that you have along the way of learning these practices and practicing the practices, you become a person that you're proud to be.
Yeah.
So the whole the whole process is phenomenal, and you have things to give to other people, and you certainly have given yourself a gift as well.
Yeah.
Thanks for picking this topic. It was such a great one, Brian.
Thank you. Thanks.
I really loved it. And we hope you did too. If this was a powerful topic for you, please share it with somebody who could use it. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope that this conversation will help you improve your practice and change the way you think about your work, your clients, and yourself.
Continue your exploration of trauma-sensitive somatic coaching by listening to more podcast episodes at somaticcoachingacademy.com. You could be the trusted guide that people turn to help them with their most challenging situations and to reach their most precious goals. Thank you for joining us.
We'll see you next time.